If your law firm isn't holding client review meetings on a regular basis, stay tuned. Hi, welcome to the BD Roundtable. We're here today with Alistair Marshall. He's a director at Professional Services BD and has over 30 years of experience in business development. On the call, we learn how client review meetings can lead to increased revenue, what is involved in an ideal client meeting, and how the business development team can help institutionalize these and keep up the momentum. So if you'd like to participate in upcoming interviews like this, head on over to bdroundtable.com to sign up to become a member for free. When you do, you get access to a private Slack group community, and you get to join hundreds of peers like yourself. Now, here's Alistair. So do you advise any other professional services industries, or do you mainly cater to law firms?
It's mainly law, but I do also do accountants who have very similar challenges, and I do bank and wealth management people. And more recently, in the last 2 years, I've taken on engineers, another professional service who, again, have similar challenges when it comes to attracting new clients and building revenues.
Okay.
Or
Now,
professional businesses.
have you found any specific particular aspects of working with a law firm as opposed to engineers or accountants?
Yes, I have. You might be quite amused. So lawyers tend to be very risk averse, as you might expect. So they're not always so keen to jump onto new skills, whereas engineers love fixing things. So they're more prepared to take on whatever it takes to improve a situation. But I love the lawyers, and I have empathy with these people. This type of lessons and learning is not covered in law school. And then so you go to a law firm, and I have huge empathy, because all of a sudden, if you want to progress your business or you want to become partner and grow as a career, no one really tells you how to do this. And in some places you might be lucky and you inherit a practice from someone who's retiring. But those opportunities are smaller and smaller as we progress through time. So this is a really important learn for people on how to improve the way moving forward, I think. And,
Yeah.
and for people here who are not practicing solicitors, but who are in marketing and business development functions, this is a real key thing to get right. The clues in the title, professional services, so the service aspect is really key. And if anybody doesn't do this client review meeting type process, they really are missing out on opportunities. Most people in the law will tell me that they grow their practice through referrals. The best time to ask for a referral is to create a trigger moment when to ask. And when someone's describing how well you've done, that's the perfect time to ask. So there's no better opportunity really than when you're doing a good client review meeting.
Yeah, absolutely. And these client review meetings are kind of top of the mind for law firms now. With COVID, everyone's sort of picking up the phone, getting back to the old school method of connecting with clients. But there may be some apprehension about, well, what do I really say? I don't want to sound salesy. I don't want to ask for work. So could you run us through sort of what does a good client review call or meeting look like? I mean, what should the lawyers be asking or bringing to the table?
Okay, well, before I get there to the specific questions, I thought I might go through a timeline, which might be helpful
Sure.
for people. So one of the questions would be around when we should do this. And there's two schools of thought depending on the size of the client, because in some large organizations, one project or one piece of litigation might run for 3 years. So if you wait until the end before you do a client review, you kind of losing the impetus there and the opportunity. So you should make a decision at what levels during that piece of litigation you do this. Certainly you should be doing it once a year. If it's a big client, I would be doing it more regularly than that, and I would be doing it with more than one individual in an organization. Essentially you're trying to measure the performance relative to the client's goal rather than your own. And that's a really important thing to say, because you should always look at this from the client's angle rather than yours. And so in terms of who's going, which stakeholders need to be involved in the meeting from both organizations, both yours and the clients. And the larger the firm, the larger the client, it could well be you've got multiple points or geographical offices or departments that need to be involved. I would also tend to send an agenda in advance. and tell people this is what you, or the areas you're planning to discuss, so they can make some preparations. The other thing with that, it's from a perspective of client service, it shouldn't be a one-way diatribe. It needs to be a two-way conversation, and the client needs to have the opportunity to involve topics that they want to flush out. So rather than you dictate what the agenda should look like, I always think it's good practice to ask them to put some input. It also allows people to prepare the information or the data that's required to add value to the discussion. So then we move on to what are the objectives? Why are we actually doing this? So you need to probe all the areas of concern. So you might want to consider what the pain points might be. And usually, you know, poor communication and responsiveness comes up from the client side. It could well be finance in the way that you charge for the work. It could be, but that might change as we move forward. The other thing I should think about, you want to ask bigger questions, macro questions. So strategic rather than just operational concerns. You don't want to waste 20 minutes talking about one individual didn't send an invoice on the right day. That's not what this is all about. And I think you need to ask bigger questions and really understand why that organization started doing business with you, and why do they continue to do business with you, and what was the criteria in choosing you as an organization to supply legal services in the first place. I think that's quite an important thing. And I also think it's good if you actually try and work out what does the definition of success for the people you're talking to. So if you're talking to an in-house counsel, you really should understand what are the metrics that the in-house counsel gets measured on, and you make sure, well, how do you make their lives easier by doing what you do? Talk to them about what are their KPIs, key performance indicators for the next 12 months, and then what can you do as a supplier organization to help them hit their own internal goals. I think that's an important point to make. So then from a performance point of view, I think you should be thinking about the historical performance between the two organizations, and you can go back as many months or years as you wish. But I think if you're looking for trends, you probably need to go back 3 years. Many firms are poor at sourcing this type of information, but it should all be there available in your practice management systems. It's how you access that and take it out. And then think about what other areas do they have legal budgets for that you currently don't supply? So I think it's a taken rule that I've used for years that most law firms only supply between 1.7 and 2.7 services to a client. So if you're working for a large multidiscipline firm, you've probably got 15 to 20 service offerings. So if someone's only actually taking 2 or 3 from you, your opportunity to cross-sell is massive. And in many instances, they don't know that you supply all these things because you've never talked to them about it.
Right.
That's not their fault, it's yours. And therefore you owe it to yourselves to have that conversation to discuss what budgets do you have for other areas of the law that we could help you with. And I think often you'll talk about how do we get better, and I think that's lazy. If someone says we need you to improve your service or get better, you need to follow that up with sub-questions about, well, what does better look like? And you should be looking to really ask questions about both quality and quantitative terms. What does better look like? And I often ask questions on a scale of 1 to 10. Where would you rate us on such a thing? People might come back and give me a 7, which isn't necessarily good nor bad. And I'll say, well, what would we have to improve to get that score to a 9 or a 10? Because it forces people to be very specific on what the improvements or what the action points need to be. I think when you go and see people initially, you have to build rapport. So in terms of who's going, I'm a little bit reluctant to send the relationship partner on their own. And I think this is where some of the BD people could actually take some of this responsibility for themselves and do some of this work on their own. Quite often clients, if they have an issue with an individual relationship partner or with a firm, are going to be reluctant to discuss that face to face with the person who's causing the problem, because that's embarrassing and it's not something that people are going to relish. Whereas if you send a third party along, whether that be a managing partner or a head of department or someone from marketing and business development, there's a good opportunity there that they'll feel less pressure and they will be able to actually discuss what the challenge is.
So bring them along to the meeting, not in place of the relationship partner.
Well,
Or
again, it's an interesting
it depends,
discussion.
right?
Interesting discussion. So the only time I've actually worked in-house in a firm, I did these myself and didn't involve the partners, because the other thing is if you leave powerful partners to make the decision on which clients you should run this with, if they think they've got a challenging relationship with a client, they'll just choose not to run this project with that client. So what you end up with, I used to describe it as a milk run. So all we do is go and interview people who love the firm and love the partner. So you end up with a false reckoning of what's going on. So you should have a mix between those clients who you have a good relationship with, those ones who are rather challenging. Do you see what I mean? So you have a balance and a mix rather than just going to the winners, if you like.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think if lawyers are doing this sort of on their own, they might do it for a few meetings, and gets left to the wayside as they get too busy, right? So the law firms need to sort of institutionalize this process somehow, right?
Yes, lovely word is culture.
Right.
And it takes a little bit of a while for it to be a cultural thing, and that tends to need to come from the top. So the managing partner isn't going to really, if this isn't in place currently, it's likely that they're going to have to want this to be done to make it happen.
So talking with some of the BD Roundtable members, we've found that there are a few different types of client reviews. There's the relationship review, there's the post-matter review, there's possibly a post-pitch or post-bid review.
Yep.
So for the relationship review, I mean, that can be done sort of on a schedule, right? Would you recommend we do post-matter reviews as well on a substantive matter that we've finished?
Yep, absolutely. I would.
In conjunction with these relationship reviews, but wouldn't that be a bit too much? How do you balance that?
There is a balance. So you can't impose on the client's time. And this needs to come across, as I say, that the benefit is for the client, not for the hosting firm. But as I say, maybe if I cover off what I've written here is some sample questions and areas for discussion.
Yeah, we can get into those.
Maybe the best way to answer that question is for me to go through some of the list here on the areas that I'd probe. So the first one would be around how well do we understand your market and your organization? What work do we need to do for this? So in advance, you might need to Google certain things about them. You might need to get an annual report. So if it's a listed business, they'll have an annual report for shareholders. That should be read before you go, so you have an understanding of who's who in the zoo. There might have been some movements at board level that you need to consider. You probably find out what their KPIs are for the year going ahead and the financials and all those types of things. You might find that you're working for a business that's grown 30%, but your business with them's flatlined. So if that's the case, what's going on? You're potentially missing out on an opportunity. The other thing that comes up, going back to which relationship is used, is quite often you'll talk to a partner and the partner will come back and say, oh, we get all the available work from them. Our relationship with them is fantastic. And then you go and do something like a client review meeting, and it turns out you only get 5% of what they're giving out. So you could have a huge, major more piece of work, but if you just rely on that partner and his opinion, you miss opportunities hugely. So then I guess you might go into, do we consistently provide the right type of advice and recommendations to the firm? So that's a qualitative piece about your tailored situation. You might talk about what improvements we can make, but they're likely to be time driven, I suspect. And then you're into the relationship piece. So have we formed productive relationships with your key players? And how can we improve our relationships with your people? And that might be, you could do training for them. You could come in and maybe do a secondment. There could be a number of ways that you would perceive to be adding value to the client relationship. Next one on my list is about how easy are we to do business with, and are we always ready and willing to help? And how could we improve? I think sometimes, certainly the bigger the firm, the bigger the perception that they think the way that they do everything is the right way. So they go, sorry, we can't do it like that because we're so-and-so and so-and-so, and we've been doing this for 100 years this way, and therefore we're going to continue to deliver this legal service in this manner, whereas that's not going to work for all clients in all situations. So then you might move on to, how do you rate our tangibles? So that would be things like our availability. I used to joke to people about the 3 A's: availability, affability, and ability. in that order. And then you might talk about, what's the value or how good is our correspondence, our contracts, our reports, our technology and systems, whole loads of things you can ask questions there. What aspects of our people and our facilities and premises do you suggest we work on? So you can get into some real specifics. Again, this is why you need the agenda in place, because you'll have a certain finite window of time. And you don't want to spend all the time on, what's our building and facilities and reception area like, if that's not it's not part of the decision-making process. So that's important that you work out what's important to them. Okay. Then I've maybe talked to some recent matters and some of the work and the projects that you've been dealing with. And was there anything we did particularly well? I always think it's good to start on a positive. I think the reason some lawyers avoid doing this type of activity is because they perceive that they're going to get bashed on the head that something was wrong, where I actually think if you start on a positive, what do you think we did particularly well? You start in a positive vibe and it gets the conversation off to a good start. Inevitably, you're going to have to ask about what aspects fell short of your expectation. And one of the things you might find in that discussion is really ask where the value is in the relationship. So what keeps you working with us? You've been using us now for 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, whatever it is. What is it that particularly works? And then, what comments do you have about the way that we charge for our work? I think is an important one, particularly so now. Does it represent good value? How could it be changed for the better? Are there any alternative fee arrangements that you would suggest that we consider?
Yeah, I have a very specific question about that, which I'll ask you in the Q&A, all about the pricing models and stuff during these reviews. Yeah. Now, you did mention, sorry, I'm just cutting in on here. I don't want to forget. So you mentioned about cross-selling and, what other areas that we could provide you service. Now, I think we've seen a lot of big companies sort of unbundling from law firms. So they used to just go to one law firm, full service. And now we've found that, okay, they're going to pick the experts from each, industry and just, pick the best for their matter. So how can lawyers approach that topic tactfully and say, oh, by the way, we also have a real estate practice? How can we raise that during the meetings without?
I think that comes down to my earlier point about you need to understand what their KPIs are and that of the organization. So we're at the end of financial year here in Australia. It's the perfect time to be talking to senior people in client organizations about what their goals and aspirations are post-COVID for the next 6-12 months. If that rose up with, we need to either change our premises because, we've got 20 floors in all these office blocks and we only need 10 because now 50% of the workforce are working at home. It could well be you have a partner in the organization who is a specialist at renegotiating real estate contracts. I would suggest that's a great time to offer that service. So again, it's trigger moments, but you don't find those out unless you ask the right questions. So you're not selling anything. The whole concept or the change of attitude in the head needs to be, how do I help this client achieve their goals rather than go to the meeting thinking, what can I get out of this for us as a law firm? You need a change of attitude in your approach.
I think that's correct. And that's where the BD teams can really help the lawyers. And okay, remember, we're talking about the client's goals, not our goals. If we help them reach their goal, then we get our goal by default, because we get the work. Now, after these meetings, so we've asked all these questions, we had a good meeting, we got some candid feedback. Then what? How do we show follow-up? Let's say a client or the client mentioned, okay, you could do better in this and this. Okay, how do we take that back to the firm? How do we communicate that internally? And how do we show the client that, we've heard them and we've implemented X, Y, and Z?
Okay, well, whether your scores are good or less impressive, we shouldn't be avoiding the honest answers and feedback. And we shouldn't avoid bringing those clear messages back to our organization. So as I say, you might have a number of areas where you've scored it 1 to 10. You might have some good scores, some less good scores. So first of all, if you've got good scores, take advantage of it, because that's the time where you need to say, in the future, we might have we might have a tender document coming up and we need to ask for referees. So given what you just said, would you be happy to be a referee on our next BD project? Right? If you don't ask that question, you miss an opportunity. It could well be that you use them as a case study or a testimonial in marketing going forward. You might also really want to take the situation back and say, this is a proper debrief meeting that we need to have internally, because I've actually opened up a can of worms here that we need to address as an organization. This is serious. So we need to have a proper debrief meeting. It may well be that you actually require a number of key stakeholders in your own organization to attend it. But if you ask specific questions and you've got specific numbers on a scoring system, you can be very specific about where you need to improve, and therefore you know which people in your own organization need to be involved in the process. It could, because your feedback won't be just about the quality of the advice. It could well be, as I say, you know, you're difficult to deal with, your invoices are always wrong, we have to challenge them all the time, that's why we don't pay you, we don't like the people in accounts, we don't like the way they ask for the money. You know, your feedback could be across a whole number of different people. So, but if there's no follow-up, there's no point in the meeting almost. You know, it's almost like networking events. If you go to a networking event and don't follow up, there was no point going.
Exactly.
So I would say you need to send action points in writing within 24 hours. And that's for both sides. So who's doing what by when? You as the client, you said you were going to do this. It could even be that they have to send you specific examples of what they're not happy with. It could be a whole host of things, but put it down in writing who's doing what by when. And then, as I say, you need to have a reflection and review internally with your own team, depending on who you need to be there. Focus on the gaps and define some measurement going forward on how do you know you've improved this? What's the metric going to be? Rather than just pay lip service to it, what's the actual end result going to be? And then you need to brainstorm some solutions and, you know, develop a plan on how you're going to make improvements in certain areas. And to be fair, it could well be all you're actually doing is maintaining something that's already at a 9 or 10 out of 10. But share the importance of that to the client with your internal group and say, you might not think internally you're doing a great job at this, but they're saying it's really important to them and they love the way you do it. You know, I'm all about sharing love in an organization rather than just sharing the bad news. I think we get too focused on that sometimes. And then any recommendations or trends or data or observations you're taking back to the client, always ask about the so what test. Why am I telling them this? Why is it important to them? So don't just go back and give messages for the sake of giving messages. Now, I've written some other things down here. I don't know whether we've got time for it. So maybe I'll slip and let's be specific on the areas that you want to address.
Yeah, let's say that for the Q&A. So we'll leave that here. So thank you for all of your information you've provided, quite valuable. So if anyone wants to get in touch with you to learn a little bit more, where can they go?
Well, I would point them to the website, which is www.professionalservicesbd.com.au. And if they go to blogs and articles, there's vast numbers of articles written there about a whole host of BD topics that would be valuable to people. And they're not huge, long documents. These would be 800-word pieces, snippets that people can digest over a coffee or something. But it would all be quite, easy to understand directive stuff.
Okay, fantastic. I'll link all of that in the description below. Thank you very much, Alistair, for speaking with us today.
Thank you.